Hi there, welcome to What and Series 16 and number 2. We're talking about Joseph, and he's giving a report to his dad about the bad behaviour of his brothers. This is probably not a really logical thing to do, and this naturally made him very unpopular and disliked amongst his brothers. Also, his dad making this coat or this tunic of many colours. Jacob's favouritism of Joseph was plain for everybody. Was even made a great musical. Anyway, including Joseph himself. And as an outward display of his favour, he gives this coat of many colours, and this signified a position of favour, a princely standing, and I think definitely of birthright, in a dramatic way, saying, this is the guy who's going to get everything. According to one commentator called Boyce, the real idea behind the ancient Hebrew phrase for tunic of many colours is one that extends all the way down to the wrists and the ankles as being something different from a shorter one or a working one. So he's set up as being not a working man. The garment is of privilege and status, and the man who wore such a tunic watched others do the hard work. Consequently, the brothers didn't like it. Actually, it says they hated him and could not speak nice to him. Jacob's favoritism of Joseph was an obvious source of conflict within the family. The brothers naturally went out of their way to make it hard for him. But still, Jacob favoured him, and Joseph reported their bad behaviour back to Jacob. Now, he's known as a dreamer, and this is where it comes from in verse 5. Now, Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream, which I have dreamed. There were binding sheaves in the field. Then, behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood around and bowed down to my sheaf. Wow. You can imagine how the brothers react to that. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him even more for his dreams and his words. Yeah. He had a dream and he tells it to his brothers. And they hated him even more. At best, Joseph showed a great lack of tact, didn't he? Surely he knew how much his brothers hated him already. And then he gives this dream interpretation, and what happens? They hate him even more. The Bible tells us that God may speak through dreams, and it happens numerous times. But it doesn't give us a guidebook for dream interpretation. If one wants to hear the voice of God, well, I think we should read the Bible. We should expect that God speaks to us in the Bible. If he does speak to us in a dream, that would be unexpected these days, but still a valid communication for God. Notice that he says, please hear this dream. Joseph dreamed of his brothers in a grain field at harvest, each with a bundle of wheat stalks, or as they're called in the Bible, sheaves. The sheaves belonging to his brothers bowed down to the sheaf that belonged to Joseph. I think it's pretty plain, isn't it? It's pretty plain what the interpretation that Joseph puts on them. And it says there, shall you indeed reign over us? The brothers perfectly understood the meaning. They didn't get it wrong. One day Joseph would reign over them and have dominion over them. Also relevant to this dream was the fact that it involved sheaves of wheat. Joseph's ultimate position of status over his brothers would relate to grain and food. We're going to talk about that further on in the story. Now, it's not just one dream. He has a second dream here, starting in verse 9. Then he dreamed still another dream, and he told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers. His father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? and his brothers envied him. But his father kept the matter in mind. Yeah, it's a similar dream, isn't it? He dreamed another dream, but it had the same kind of message, and he does it again. He tells it to his brothers and his dad as well. If Joseph was unwise to tell the first dream, knowing how irritating that was to his brothers, then it was worse to share the second dream. Total lack of tact. The second dream was likely the cause of even more resentment because it set him above not only his brothers, but above his mum and his dad. Joseph probably had the sort of pride common among the favoured or the blessed. He was so focused on how great his dreams were for him, he probably didn't even begin to consider how the dreams would sound in the ears of other people. We can be the same ourselves when we're totally focused on ourselves, can't we? At this point, Joseph was a contrast to Jesus. Jesus wants us to be, as he was on earth, an other person-centered person. Joseph seems to have fallen short in this area. Though Joseph was wrong to tell the dreams, perhaps, they certainly did come true. One may receive a wonderful message from God that he does not intend them to publish to others. Normally when great things happen to us, we want everybody to know. Or if we do good things, we want people to know. Joseph was much the same. Joseph showed a lack of wisdom here, perhaps rooted in the arrogance and pride that had been developed through the special treatment. It says, "Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" At this point, even Joseph's father, Jacob, was a bit offended. He couldn't understand how Joseph could be exalted higher than his own father and mother. This portion of Genesis possibly isn't always in strict chronological order. Back in Genesis 35, Joseph's mother, Rachel, died. This portion of Genesis may seem to backtrack a little bit on that somewhat. I'm not totally sure how that all works. Probably the transition point is in Genesis 37, verse 2, where it says, "This is the genealogy of Jacob." This likely ends the record preserved by Jacob himself, who recounted the death of Rachel. And the next line begins to record the preserved lineage by Joseph himself. These kinds of transitions are found fairly regularly in Genesis 5 and 6 and then through to chapter 25. The interesting thing is that it says the sun and moon and the 11 stars bowed down to me. The idea, the stars, the moon and the sun representing the family of Israel, it's actually repeated in Revelation at the other end of the book of the Bible. That passage speaks of Jesus coming from the nation of Israel. We might leave that there for today and go on next week about what happens to Joseph next.